and what I've watched you do in the maybe 2 years that I've known you. And I was so blown away in her ability to not only, help herself get connected, but just orchestrate all these multitudes that I was like, when I started writing the book, there was no way I could not include Jennifer, whichever you prefer, Jen, in my book. She epitomizes everything that I talk about. So knowing that you are in her orbit, I would imagine that you also live those kind of ethos that she does. So, and also just thank you. I've been doing a lot of talks where I don't get to see people, and I can't even tell you how wonderful it is to actually see people and beautiful people like that. So if you notice I'm a little punchy, it's been that kind of week. But I will give you a little backstory on the title and just maybe just a little bit about me, because I grew up many years ago in a small town in upstate New York, and I had parents that were very much serial connectors before the term was even a possibility. And in the late 60s and early 70s, which was the formative years of my childhood, I would vie for space at the breakfast table for my bowl of cereal or toast, because my parents would have the 5 local newspapers spread out, plus yesterday's New York Times, because of course it would come the next day, up, to all the Albany area. And they would be sitting there with a razor blade and a scissors, massively clipping and cutting, and then putting the actual articles in postal mail with a quick manual typewritten little, I'm thinking of you, cousin Harry, or I'm thinking of you, colleague Joan, and my mother did PR for public television. So it would be, a note to a reporter saying, this made me think of you. And I just assumed everybody did that, right? And I came of age professionally late 80s and, pre-internet. But when I landed a fax machine, it was like nirvana. Even though it took me a really long time to figure out how to use a fax machine. However, I could instantaneously do what I literally grew up doing, instead of having to have that delayed reaction where you would put it in the mail and then you'd be like, when did they get it? Now I could do it within however long, sometimes 5 minutes, sometimes 5 days, right? And then of course, when the internet came, that was another big boost, because you could just clip an article, pop it in an email and send it. And then lo and behold, 2006, 2007, we all of a sudden had LinkedIn, Facebook, and the rest is history. So over the years, I started being a collector of people. I've always been intellectually curious. And that has made me kind of who I am. But because I've been so curious, I've been able to learn a lot about people. And then because of that, I've been able to, mix and match. And maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, I finally kind of tipped over, because the upteenth zillion person said, Susan, when are you going to write a book and talk about how you connect everyone? And it was one story that really put me over the edge. A good friend of mine told me that when she dropped her 12-year-old and her 10-year-old off at the bus stop in the morning, and they would get on the bus, she would kiss them goodbye and hug them. They would get up, go on many of you probably have children that age, and they would get into their little seats on the bus and then go right to their phones. And I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, I would talk to the person next to me. I would avoid the bully on the bus, the whole thing. And I just thought to myself, wait, there's something wrong here. We cannot, continue to just rely only on that for our connections, let alone what I increasingly saw myself doing. And that was measuring my success based on the number of clicks, the number of likes, the number of followers. Yeah. That has nothing to do with deep, meaningful relationship. Yes, it might lead to one, but it is not the actual relationship. You meet somebody at a rubber chicken dinner and then you connect with them on LinkedIn. That is not a deep, meaningful relationship. It can become one. Mm-hmm. So I am certainly not anti-networking. So the original impetus for the book was to really figure out and find out, how do we get back to the world that, my parents lived in, obviously using the technology that we have, but going deeper. Yeah. And I started to write the book, and it was February 2020. And then March happened, and we know what happened. All we had were the clicks and the likes and the followers to basically continue to stay in touch. However, we did get very innovative with the technology tools we've had. They have not, they certainly haven't filled that gap of the hugs and real eye contact and all. But can you imagine if we didn't have it? And I also, throughout the 8-month process, which exactly what it took to write the book, I did multiple interviews, including with Jen, with people who are known connectors, known community builders. And I have to tell you, it gave me a renewed sense that not only are people still building meaningful relationships, AKA this room, but also we now are in a once in a lifetime opportunity to do a reset, right?
Right.
We now know what it's like to go without. We've perfected in some instances how to be more meaningful with our technology, and we get to go back out into some semblance of reality or normalcy. What that may look like, I don't know exactly. However, so that is basically the impetus behind Lost Art of Connecting.
Yeah.
Very long-winded answer.
No, it's a great impetus. Why do you think meaningful connections are so important for women in particular?
Well, I think they're important for everyone. I think, and this is a very this is a generalization, but I think we all know women are uniquely more empathetic, more compassionate, and of course, not every woman is, but that leads us to the ability to go deeper. I think we're better listeners. Which I learned in the research for my book is a extraordinarily important thing to become a meaningful connector. So and if anything we know, and Jen, you've done a lot of writing and work on this. Women have borne the brunt of this horrific pandemic more than anyone else,
Mhm.
and to build back, it's going to take meaningful relationships to help each other. I mean, we've got to rely on each other. And the only way I need to do that is to reach out to the people that I have over my lifetime turned and supported and helped.
Yeah, absolutely. You have a method in your book, and I would love to hear a little bit more about it. Gather, ask, and do. Can
Yeah,
you tell us about this method and
sure.
how we can take it into our lives and adopt it?
Of course. And I want to preface it by saying this is not something you do once or twice. This is something you could use anytime in your life, but most particular when you are going through any kind of change. You have a new baby, you're going back to work after having a new baby, you have a new job, you've moved from New York to LA, and you really don't know anyone. I mean, again, it is extremely relevant if you do or have changes coming up, but it also can be used right now. And I think actually right now is a unique opportunity. So gather is all about first determining into yourself, what is a meaningful relationship? Because what I determine is a meaningful relationship may be different than Ivy, it may be different than Shannon, maybe different than you, Jen. It's also the time where you actually think about what is the community you want to build around you that is going to help you meet your particular goals.
Mhm.
And what are you going to do to make sure that community doesn't look just like you, that doesn't sound just like you, that isn't the same age as you? And also, what is the secret sauce, or your, what I call in the book, your chief differentiating factor that you can bring to your community? Okay,
Mhm.
so that's the gather phase, and obviously there's very specific detail throughout the first part of the book that talks
Mhm.
about specific exercises you can do. The ask phase is actually different than what you would normally think. It is not about asking for what you want, although I'm a big believer in being very direct, and the book does go into being better at asking on behalf of yourself. But
Mhm.
it actually is learning to ask the questions that allow you to learn more about the other person. And I don't mean by just more, I mean meaningful things about that other person so that you can then get to the do. And that is when you can actually be the person that follows through, follows up, that actually becomes literally trustworthy and dependable, which honestly is a really good thing to be both personally and professionally.
Yeah.
So that is essentially, in a very kind of condensed version, gather, ask, do.
Can you give me
And I,
can you give me some examples of the ask?
sure,
So
sure.
of like what you might ask to like start into having that meaningful dialogue with somebody?
Well, obviously, right now we have this great equalizer that many of us are suffering something, whether it's grief or loss, and I feel, God forbid, you've lost family or lost jobs or lost loved ones. But even if you actually came through this year and you're okay, you're just okay. You know, there isn't those moments that we used to have of joy, right?
Mhm.
Um, so, I mean, I am a huge believer. This is the time to be vulnerable. This is the time to not be superwoman. Okay. Thank
Mhm.
God, right? Maybe that's one good thing, right? We could just be shitty.
Yeah.
Sorry. I hope I didn't offend anyone.
No.
But to me, one of the most important asks you can have when you are in a proverbial online room or when we get back in the real world is, how are you? I mean, really, how are you? And how have you been wrongfully affected by this pandemic? And is
Mm,
there anything that could be helpful that maybe I could be doing in my life?
mm.
Okay. That is I mean, that's a deep question. So you may not want to go there right in the beginning, but
Right.
things like, if you could pick anywhere on the planet that you want to go to when this is done, where would you go and why?
Mm.
That type of question really tells you something about somebody. It tells you a little bit of you get a sense of their dreams and hopes.
Mhm.
Okay. I love to ask, if you could solve one problem in the next month, what would it be?
Mm.
Okay.
You're asking.
Again, these are questions that are going to elicit the kind of responses that you then can either make a mental note, or what I do is I write it down
Mhm.
and then I follow up. And this obviously is what scares a lot of people because we're all so busy.
Right.
But the follow up doesn't have to be immediate. And the follow up can be simply, Michelle, it was really great speaking with you last night. And I love the fact that you want to go to Mumbai or, or Mumbai, at the end. And guess what? I have a friend who was just there and I'm going to connect you with her. Okay, I'm being super silly. But first of all, by responding in a timely fashion, you don't forget.
Right.
Secondly, you let the person know that you were listening, you heard them, and you saw them. And they're in my world, and maybe I'm smoking too much crack, although I've never smoked crack in my life. To me, there's no greater gift you can give people than let them know that you are seeing them and hearing them and confirming that. And I don't think we do enough of that. I think, we make connections, we connect on LinkedIn, and then you know what, we're done. We move on.
Yeah.
And we can't do this with everybody. And I want to remind people, my methodology is not a numbers game. You can
Right.
do this with 10 people and you're building meaningful relationships. And for the introverts in the room, that should be a sigh of relief. This is not like walking in and just glad handing. And again, online or in
Yeah.
the real world, it is going deep rather than broad.
Yeah. I love that. Actually, it leads into my next question. Do
Oh
you
wait, I just have to acknowledge, Francine, that quote is one of my favorite quotes. Thank you so much for putting in the chat. People never forget the way you make them feel, Maya Angelou, and it's so so true. It really is. And I'm old, and I'm probably the oldest woman in the room, so I can tell you from experience. I'm 56.
I don't know if that's true, but that's awesome. Um, and you talk about, getting to that level of meaningful connection, but do you have these like different buckets of like, here are my most meaningful connections, here are my like kind of more work connections, or how do you kind of start to,
Sure,
do you do
sure.
that? And
And,
is
and
that a good thing to do?
well, and this isn't for everyone, and we could spend the next hour talking about it, but there is not a work Susan and a home Susan.
Mm.
I think in my mid 40s, I got exhausted being two people. And I started to look around at all of the people I surrounded myself with. They were friends, but they also, in various instances, we did business together. We recommended each other. So it is a very different dynamic than years ago when we would leave the office at 5 o'clock, go home, and put on our whatever our home clothes. I mean, I'm in my living room right now. I mean, but even before the pandemic, and I have for the last 14 years or so in my home in Brooklyn. I live alone. Not all that time. I had a bad breakup 6 years ago. But to assuage my loneliness over the last 6 years, I've hosted so many gatherings, and people always say, "Why do you host so much?" And first of all, then I feel less lonely. And it's a lot easier than going out, is having people come over. And that actually is something else I talk about in the book, is being a convener helps you build connections. And it also helps you deal with the, the word FOMO, which of course many of us have had. And I came up with something over the years called JOMO, but not the joy of missing out. It's the joy of meeting others. And you can start small. You can have 4 people and ask each one of those to bring 1 people. And again, this is nothing that Jen is not doing every Thursday night. Um, so I mean, she is living this ethos. But the point I was making is when I would have these events, I would look around and it would be professional friends, people in the nonprofit sector that I've supported, startup. And I mean, it was it was just a room full of interesting people. And there's no greater joy that I would get than watching the magic happen when they all kind of mixed and mingled.
I love that. One of the things that I've found, and I don't know if that I am doing this, but that I find sometimes when I'm connecting with someone that it's so much easier for me to ask about them and learn and listen. And sometimes I hang up the conversation and realize that they didn't ask me anything and that they know nothing about me. And it's a little like I almost
Charming.
want to call them later and be like, okay, now can we do the my half so then you know about me too? Have you ever had that situation? And what would you kind of suggest that I can,
Exactly that.
on it?
Exactly that. I don't know if I would quite word it that way,
Right.
but I mean, I can't tell you how many times that happens. And just like right now, I am so much more comfortable asking questions. So, I am definitely not in my comfort zone right now, but I have to tell you, I think it's a perfect opportunity to respond back and repeat a few of the things that you heard them say, perhaps make an introduction to somebody else who could be valuable, or let them know something that could be valuable. And then actually say, we didn't get a chance to talk about the work that I do, but it dovetails so well into what you are working on. Tie it back, right? But it's very important you get your voice heard too. So, and I should caveat it all. I mean, there's always going to be nasty people out there. I
Right.
mean, you know, if somebody has no interest in hearing about you, they're not a meaningful connection.
Yeah, no, no, definitely. And I don't think it's interest. It's just sometimes the time.
No, it
And you're
happens.
digging so much into them because you want to learn so much. Like I never take it as like, oh, wait a second, like
Yeah.
that, I never am mad about it, but I think it's
No, no,
definitely something that happens.
but you have the perfect opportunity. And the good news is you have all that data
Yeah,
from which to actually respond in a way that the person might be interested in, right?
yeah,
If the person, works in a particular sector and clearly is really deep interested in that, you know, not to say you have to totally talk about what that person is doing professionally or things, but it gives you clues of what to come back with,
yeah.
also what to ask of them. For again, I want to make sure this is not all about helping others. It's just one methodology to build. I mean, there's a zillion methodologies to build
Yeah.
meaningful relationships.
Yeah. We were talking about the other day, we were talking about this tweet that came out that someone said that without permission, the connections were violent. And I was like so shocked by this tweet. And like, everyone was saying, yes, you have to do the double opt-in and everything. And I've never there's some cases that I've always done the double opt-in, always, a job referral, someone famous, like something like that, like always do the double opt-in. But sometimes you get to the level of a relationship where you just know that that person's going to say yes. And so you make that connection because you see a mutual beneficial thing. What do you think about that double opt-in connection?
I certainly wouldn't go as far as saying violent. I mean, I think to me that is an example of clickbait, right? You put it out there because you want to attract attention, right? And good for her if that was her goal. But I will say, over my lifetime, I have obviously angered people when I have gone ahead and made the assumption that I could. So I typically err on asking, but I also know there are those people that I would always ask, right? I mean, I just like for whatever reason, Joanna Cole's name just popped in my head. She's a friend, and I mean, but she's one of those people that I would ask her first. Um, Kate Luzio, even though I adore her and I consider her a dear friend, I know how busy she is, so I might ask her first, right? I think it's really trying to put yourself in that person's world at that point.
Mhm.
And then make the determining factor. Are you buddy? Like, are you really like my dear friend tonight before this conversation, Adora Udoji and I were on the phone for an hour. I could anytime, right? Those types of people. But I think right now, especially because this past year has obviously been, you know, unusually harmful to a lot of people, I tend to err on the side.
Yeah.
For all of you, you are more than welcome at any point in time to introduce me to anyone. You do not have to ask my permission, okay? But that's who I am, right? But I can't assume that everyone is like me.
Yeah.
Not
No.
for
And actually, you're right, because actually that might not be being a good connector, right? And that might be making someone else that you're meaningfully connected to uncomfortable. So yeah, I like that. Um, what with the she session, you mentioned this in terms of like the toll on our time. Like how valuable and is connecting and networking right now? And how much do you think that we have to like amp it up?
it's a tough question, and obviously it's going to depend on anybody's responsibilities, the challenges they're facing, and again, I want to reiterate in my book that this is the long haul. This isn't something that you have to do every day or whatever, but it's a process that you can utilize to help you over time or when you're going through changes. But I do think in times of challenges, it is your deep community that is going to be there to help you.
Mhm.
So I think this year, if anything, has, at least for me, given me the opportunity to reconnect with people that I hadn't talked to in a long time.
Yep.
And honestly, that's given me some sense of joy when there is this little bit of joy. I mentioned earlier, I have been alone for 12 months. I don't have children, I don't have a partner, and I have no parents. And you can probably also tell I'm not an introvert, and I have been incredibly lonely and have cried myself to sleep many, many times. And I'm not saying that to be like, oh, woe is me. I mean, I've had an income, my company's doing well, I have wonderful employees and clients, but it's been, and I effing lonely. But you know what I would do every morning is text or call about 3 to 5 people with no intention of any kind of response, but I would just say, thinking of you, sending love. How are you? Is there anything you need? And if anything, I mean, I hope there was joy on their end, but if anything, it was my SOS signal to let people know I'm here. Remember me. Don't forget about me. But it kept me connected. And I don't think I would be sitting here having to finish this book and everything if I hadn't have done that.
I love that. I hope you'll text me and say that, and I'll say let's go on a virtual walk and do that anytime, at any time. I, I would love to hear, there's maybe some of the women here tonight, and some aren't, but that are looking for work. And what do you think the main tips for connecting for women looking for work?
Sure. Start from within, okay? You really, this is where it is okay to write every single person that you know, literally know, right? I mean, and you can pull a list out of LinkedIn, you can pull a list out of your contact database, but literally, this is the time it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to say, I'm at a crossing point, or I've lost my job, but this is why that gather section is important, because it's really important at that time to be able to say, here's what I'm good at, okay? Or, here's what I want to make sure happens in the next year. And I realize nobody knows, but you can make a good guess. And I think, I want to remind everyone that every single one of us has skills and assets that we can bring to the table. So I think the number one thing is that I'll call it an SOS signal. I think you need to start with everyone you know, and you need to ask them for referrals to 2 to 3 others that they can put you in touch with. And if let's just say you email 300 people, okay, I think all of us probably know at least 300 people. That seems like a reasonable number. You will come back with at least 25 leads, okay? Maybe only 5 of them are actionable, but that will give you something to start, okay? And to me, that's a very practical thing to do. Um, and then over the years, how I have not only pierced my bubble of just everyone looking like me is getting very involved in nonprofits and local organizations that I could be not necessarily writing checks. I'm not an heiress, but offering my skills, helping on social media, providing amplification. I know, Jen, you are fabulous at this, with Girl Up and other organizations that you support. But doing that also expands your community, expands your network to meet people who are not day to day at your job or at your profession. And therefore, you have a wider pool from which to pull from. So, I mean, those are two tips that I would suggest. But you've got to start with your own community. And I would, your neighbors. I know that sounds kind of funny, but you never know. I mean, those of us in New York, can I see a show of hands who's in New York? There was like a few of you. I mean, I don't know about you, but like years would go by and I didn't know my neighbors. Yeah. But through this pandemic, I've been a little more social in the hallway because I'm so damn lonely. I'm being silly. But I think we forget that everyone we meet is a conduit to someone else, to something else, to learning something about ourselves that we didn't know. So I think don't be reticent that you only need to reach out to people who have big jobs, or because everybody knows somebody. I'm babbling. I gotta stop.
No, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. There's a question in the chat. Arsha, do you want to ask it? And did I say your name right?
Well, I'm on mute, so no, I'm not. Yes, my name is Arshia. I work in social media for a risk management firm in New York. This is a question that, we've been discussing in my team. The pandemic has really made our lives so much more difficult because we don't get any face time in office. So we are not really able to hustle the way we used to, right? We miss out on so many things. So for introverts, I think it's become even more challenging. How can introverts really get over their inhibitions, become master connectors? Are there any special tips? I think I used to be a very, very, closeted introvert. I had a game face on when I was at work, and then I realized that COVID-19 happened and I don't have a game face anymore. So, like how do we overcome these things? I think Jen knows a bit because I've been bugging her on LinkedIn for a few things, but I've been trying to get over my shyness, but it's a problem, not a problem, but I think a common trait that I see across teams, and I would love some inputs from you, Susan.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your question. And I love your backdrop. Oh my God, I want to be there. I'm like, that isn't
Manhattan. it's Europe because we were presenting at some European growth summit.
I love it. I love it. Well, first of all, one of the chapters in my book is all about connection for introverts. So without being that obnoxious person, but buy my book and read the chapter, but I'll give you some hints. I interviewed a dear friend. Her name is Maura Aarons Melee, and she is a well-known introvert. She has a best-selling book called Hiding in the Bathroom, and she has a podcast called The Anxious Achiever. And you're not going to believe this, but there have been many times I have hid in the bathroom. Okay. I know I seem like I have no problems, but I have to tell you, ladies, I am 5 feet with heels. And when I walk into a room and it has mixed company, no one sees me. So it's kind of can be very intimidating to walk up to talk to someone because they technically just look right over me anyways. And that may be one of the reasons over the years I perfected this notion of asking, how can I be of service? How can I be helpful? Because people are much more interested in talking to you if they're talking about themselves. Hence what we were talking about with Jen. But I think number one, this is not a numbers game. I am not suggesting you, go to an event, whether it's an in-person or online, and meet 50 people. Okay. I tend to go with this basically strategy. Meet 3 people, learn 3 things, and share 3 things. And that can be done in a Zoom room. Okay. And to me, that is tolerable. That is manageable. Another thing is something like find the connector in the room, find the Susan McPherson or the Jen in the room and hang out with them. Okay. I know that sounds kind of like you're cheating, but it actually works. Okay. It's kind of like the old wingman, wingwoman, from years ago, although I'm still trying to date. So maybe I still need a wingwoman. But I think those are 2 very easy, simple ways. But most importantly, if you come with questions and already have those questions almost, I don't want to say pre-written because that sounds so prescriptive, but a few questions that you can ask somebody, let them do the talking. And then all of a sudden it's a little more comfortable for an introvert. Does that help a little bit?
Yes, thank you.
Of course.
Also, we did a session with Madeline, who's here yesterday, who does networking and public speaking for introverts, and she's fabulous at it. So we recorded that session as well. I'm going to be posting it up on our content channel, so you should definitely watch that and reach out to her because she's awesome.
Well, she should answer that question. I mean, my goodness. Oh, she's not here. Okay.
She's here, but I don't know. That's a lot. Madeline, we don't want to put you on the spot. You want
there you are with the beautiful red sweater. Oh, she doesn't have the red sweater on now.
There you go.
Hi, lovely to meet you.
Hi, nice to meet you too.
Oh, I need to learn more about you so I can quote you. So please, Jen, connect us.
Oh, I will. Madeline, she was saying that you should answer the question.
Yeah, so a couple of things for introverts and from an introvert. I totally agree. Like having a few questions ready is so helpful, and remembering that you don't have to do all of the work because most people do like to talk about themselves. I also think choosing times of day that work for you and types of groups that work can be really helpful too. So for instance, I've never been a boozy networker. Like you won't find me at a lot of networking events in bars before the pandemic or after, when people go to bars again. That's just not my choice. I also BNI, the networking group that meets at 7 a.m. in the morning, that's not my time of day. So find a time of day that you feel, primed
that's great.
Connect with people and use your natural powers of curiosity and listening as an introvert to your advantage, because so few or not enough people, I think, are doing that and like listening really intently and giving people their full attention. And the other thing I would say too is, and you might have covered this already, Susan, it always include something personal when you're introducing yourself. Like you could miss on all the professional friends, but if you tell people that you're a marathon runner, or you really like to cook, or you've picked up this new hobby during the pandemic, it makes it that much more, oh, I wish I could see that.
Yeah, I can't see it. Hold it up a little bit back.
Guide for introverts.
Oh, you have that. Yeah, their chapter.
Can't wait to read that.
No, now I'm nervous. I probably like goofed it. Anyhow, forgive me. I interrupted you with that.
So including personal things, and instead of just talking about your professional accomplishments or what's on your resume, I think make it so much easier to connect on a personal human level and further a relationship that way.
Yeah. I thought of another suggestion too, which can be potentially useful, and Madeline, I will defer to you if you agree, and that is, in the 90s, before I would go to an event, there was no way to research who was going to be in the room. Okay, maybe I could look up the Yellow Pages, see where the person lived or something, but there was no internet. I mean, and even when there was, if you there wasn't a Googling notion of finding someone. Almost every event we go to, whether it's online, we can find out enormous tidbits about the person we're going to be talking to or the people we're going to be talking to. And I'm not suggesting you go down like Spy Alley and like find out everything about the person, but you can find out, for instance, do they have children? By looking at Instagram, right? I mean, there are so many ways to help you so that when you are in those conversations, it's not as scary. And I'm not saying don't be like, I understand it is, I'm sure, can be challenging, but so that's just another tip. Like do some research before you're going to, whether it's an online event or an in-person event, to find out who's going to be there and find out maybe the folks that maybe you might feel more of an affinity for. And again, I realize that keeps us in our own bubbles. So, but this is where you have to push yourself to find people that aren't like you and talk to them.
Yeah.
And one thing I noticed, Susan, is you're wearing something really bright and colorful. And that's one of the tips that I've always utilized myself and recommend to people. Like wear something bright, wear a print, something that's memorable, because it makes you stand out and invites people to come talk to you so that you don't have to do all of the approaching and conversation starting.
Well, I won't be seen. I have to. It's like it's if I'm going hiking in the woods, I have to wear like loud colors or I will get shot because people just assume I'm like an animal. I'm low to the ground.
Does anyone have any other questions for Susan? I have a couple more, but I would love to hear from you guys in terms
Yeah.
of your questions.
Or comments, please. This
Yeah.
doesn't have to be questions. I'd love to hear from all of you.
I was just gonna make a comment. I was trying to figure out where I heard about it, but it kind of just reminded me, especially for introverts or anybody. I like thought I was gonna try this out, but of course there's a startup that has like an app to talk to strangers. You just like suppose it's what's that startup that's like invite only right now, that's sound only.
Oh, the yeah.
But I think that there's other apps too that's just like you just schedule a time and it'll just like connect you with somebody on the other side.
Oh, it's called Lunch Date or something like that.
Yeah, it might be, but I thought that was like interesting. And like recently for team building for my team, we actually took a cooking class from a Kenyan lady, and it was just like it was so cool to like talk to somebody on the other side of the world and just like feel that like connection through food as well. So I think like it was just lovely, and that like getting out of that was like impossible before the pandemic really, and then
Yes, of course.
it's unimaginable, so it's like that was through Airbnb experiences. And so I think that the pandemic has like accelerated like the confines of our connection through technology. And so I just wanted to make that comment.
Yeah, I love that. And you raised something interesting. I mean, for those of us who run maybe small businesses or departments, the onus is on us to help facilitate people feeling comfortable to connect. And shame on the CEOs of major corporations that are not trying to facilitate, given that this is such a vulnerable time. And you see the companies that are actually doing a good job at it. They are rising above. But I will say, like every Monday, we have I have 13 employees, so we're teaming. But we have a team meeting, and there's always an icebreaker. But the icebreaker is typically something like, "What was your favorite food as a child?" Or back to that, where on earth could you be if you could beam yourself anywhere right now? And what these kind of exercises or these questions are so helpful, because not just for me, I get to learn more about my team, but they get to learn about each other in a way that is more intimate in this kind of weird vortex that we are in, because some of them have never met each other in real life. I've not met some of my employees in real life, and these types of conversations. And then, we all started the pandemic having the proverbial happy hour every, once a week. And I think many of us have gravitated to some of these new types of events. And 2 weeks ago, we had one of my team members, she brought a friend to do a floral design class. We've done cooking classes, and, these types of things actually are like you said, if you can bring a chef from far away, you could never have done that, or you wouldn't have done that before the pandemic.
Yeah, I love that. I also, one other thing too, that's like looking for a group that's going through something similar to you. So when I was going through IVF, I connected to these women around the world actually in these forums where you could share personal things that you couldn't actually share with the people that because it was too hard to talk about and share with. And like the same good thing goes, and I think Francine said this to me the other day. So Francine, tell me if I'm speaking out of turn, is like, the people that are going through the she session and like really been affected, as women, you coming together to share those stories and how hard it's been, or what types of tips that they can share with each other is a really incredible thing. So when you find that kind of group that is going through a similar thing, it's always easier, I think, to make those connections too, and really open up and be vulnerable at the same time.
Yes, thank you for that.
So I would love for you to, one more question with your book. What is the one thing that you want us to leave, after we read this book and, feel from your book?
There are a couple of things. One, I think centering ourselves around how can we be of help, how can we be of service, how can we be of support is just a good way to live. There's nothing bad that will come from that. Obviously, as long as you don't put others before you. I'm not suggesting that. And just a couple of little tidbits of research that if you ever need the incentive to want to build more meaningful connections, studies show you actually live longer and you will be far more successful professionally. So, and you know, I'm not going to bore you with data and data tips, but if you do read the book, you'll see that. But no pressure. This was fun to come and meet you all and see all the wonderful goodness that Jen is putting in the world.
Susan, Michelle has one more question. I think this is an important one, just because, you know, even when the thought of like the two-way opt-in, it gives me a feeling of burnout sometimes on the connection side of things. So, you know, Michelle, do you want to ask it or?
Sure. Yes. Just really quick. I'm a super connector. So I'm joining this group. I'm in a ton of other groups. I'm in a 20+ Slack channel. I'm a full-time job seeker, so I do lots of networking. But I found myself at the end of last year, I was super burnt out. And I'm a member of lunch club. I haven't done any lunch clubs at all this year, just because I found it to be
a big
got to be a little too much.
Yeah.
So how do you manage, you know, not getting burned out being a connector?
Well, first of all, it ebbs and flows, and there's your son behind you. Also, something I have found over the last 30 years, actually being a connector makes me more efficient because I always have someone I can go to if I'm too busy to take on the task. Does that make sense? And you know, not all the time, right? And I have gotten, as I've gotten older, much more direct, and I do say no if I can't handle something because I am so busy. But I will say no, but I will come back to you. And I make a note in my calendar, whether it's 6 months, whether it's 3 months, whether it's a year. And I'll come back to that person and say, you know what, I'm a little less busy now. So buy yourself time when you need it, because if you burn out, guess what? There's no more connecting. So I think it's being realistic. And I love that you're a super connector, but you don't have to connect everyone, right? And I have to tell you, Slack can be really mind-boggling, right? I mean, it sometimes almost seems like it isn't that humanity that I'm talking about. And I know we have to use it for various, you know, we have clients that insist on it, et cetera. But you know, whenever I can, I make it the human connection. And I carry around my iPhone, but I actually make phone calls.
Yeah, I'm a phone talker as well.
Yeah, well, you and I need to get on the phone to talk. But I think, you know, look, the more people you know, the more resources you have to pull from. And that is a powerful thing. And you know, especially, you know, professionally, but also personally, you know, when you know that person who knows climate science and you hear about a job that has to do with that, you will know the right person to suggest, right? So try to look at it that way, as opposed to like, I've got to do it all and constantly.
Love that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Susan, for your
wonderful conversation.
Yes, for the awesome conversation. And I cannot wait to read the book I've ordered. So, and also we have 2 books to give away. So I will somehow figure out a way. Drake, this guy, I'll put everyone's name into a hat. I took a screenshot. I'm doing another one. We have 2 signed copies of Susan's book. And so Drake will pick those names out of a hat, and then I will contact you guys and get the books to you.
Oh my God. I don't need to be in the hat. You don't need to give me one.
No, of course not. Susan has enough books right behind her. Well, thank you guys so much.
And feel free to give out my contact info. I mean, if I can be of help to any of you at any point in time. I will tell you the next couple of months are a little wackadoodle, but after that, I will be back to just semi-crazy Susan. Right now, I'm super crazy Susan.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, guys. Hope to see you guys all soon. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Congrats, Susan.
Congratulations, Susan.
Yeah, congrats.